There you go.
All right. You're a lot quicker than I thought you'd be. All right. Well, we are continuing our study on the book of Leviticus. We're just kind of starting to get into the book. Just kind of real quickly recap what we talked about last week. The book of Leviticus, the name means of the Levites. And this is a series of instructions for how business was to be conducted amongst the Levites as pertains to sacrifices, worship, and various and sundry things for the Israelites. We talked about the fact that there are 5 basic offerings in the Mosaic Law. There is the burnt offering, then there is the grain offering, then there is a peace offering, a sin offering, and a guilt offering. And we talked last week about the burnt offering, and we talked about how the burnt offering was to atone for sin in general. And this was done several times throughout the year to atone for sin in general. And it was set up so that everything was burned except for the skin, and there was nothing that the person took from it. So we see that the frequency with which it was offered it was offered during holidays and feasts, and could also be combined with other types of offering. And so this was kind of the standard default. Hey, we're getting together. We need to make sure that we make atonement for everyone. If you'll remember back to the book of Job, right? Job would frequently make offerings on behalf of his children just in case to take care of their sins, right? And so that's the idea, is this is kind of your catch-all, and then you're going to go into your more specific as we go along. So today, we're going to pick up in chapter 2, and we're going to talk about the grain offering and the cereal offering. We kind of talked about it a little bit last time, but we're going to go into more depth today. And so let's begin in chapter 2 and verse 1. It says, when anyone brings a grain offering to the Lord, his offering shall be of fine flour. He shall pour oil on it and put frankincense on it and bring it to Aaron's sons, the priests. And he shall take from it a handful of fine flour and oil with all of its frankincense, and the priest shall burn it as a memorial portion on the altar. A food offering with a pleasing aroma, but the rest of the grain offering shall be for Aaron and his sons. It is a most holy part of the Lord's food offering. When you bring a grain offering baked in the oven as an offering, it shall be unleavened loaves of fine flour mixed with oil, or unleavened wafers smeared with oil. And if your offering is a grain offering baked on a griddle, it shall be of fine flour, unleavened, mixed with oil. You shall break it into pieces and pour oil on it. It is a grain offering. And if your offering is a grain offering cooked in a pan, it shall be made of fine flour with oil, and you shall bring the grain offering that is made of these things to the Lord. And when it is presented to the priest, he shall bring it to the altar, and the priest shall take from the grain offering its memorial portion and burn this on the altar, a food offering with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. But the rest of the grain offering shall be for Aaron and his sons. It is most holy part of the Lord's food offering. No grain offering that you bring to the Lord shall be made with leaven. For you shall burn no leaven, nor any honey, as a food offering for the Lord. As an offering of the first fruits, you may bring them to the Lord, but they shall not be offered on the altar for a pleasing aroma. You shall season all your grain offerings with salt. You shall not let the salt of the covenant with your God be missing from the grain offering. With all your offerings you shall offer salt. If you offer a grain offering of the first fruits to the Lord, You shall offer for the grain offering of your first fruits fresh ears, roasted with fire, crushed new grain. You shall put oil on it and lay frankincense on it. It is a grain offering, and the priest shall burn it as a memorial portion, some of the crushed grain and some of the oil with all of its frankincense. It is a food offering to the Lord. Okay, let's go over to Leviticus chapter 6. And we're going to look at a couple things there. And then we're going to go to Leviticus chapter 7 and look at a couple things there. All right, so Leviticus chapter 6, verses 14 to 18. All right. All right, Leviticus 6, 14 to 18. It says, "This is the law of the grain offering. The sons of Aaron shall offer it before the Lord in front of the altar. And one shall take from it a handful of fine flour of the grain offering, its oil, its frankincense that's on the grain offering. Burn this as a memorial portion, a pleasing aroma, and the rest of it shall go to Aaron and his sons to eat. It shall be eaten unleavened in a holy place. In the court of the tent of meeting they shall eat it. It shall not be baked with leaven. I have given it as their portion of my food offerings. It is a thing most holy, like sin offering and guilt offering. Every male among the children of Aaron may eat of it, as decreed forever throughout your generations from the Lord's food offerings. Whoever touches them shall become holy." All right, let's go over a chapter to chapter 7, verses 12 and 13. If he offers it for thanksgiving, he shall offer with the thanksgiving sacrifice unleavened loaves mixed with oil, unleavened wafers smeared with oil, and loaves of fine flour well mixed with oil. With the sacrifice of his peace offerings for thanksgiving, he shall bring his offering with loaves of leavened bread. All right? So, the grain offering accompanied the burnt offering more often than not, and it was a sign of one's homage and thanksgiving to God. All right? So, you would make the burnt offering for atonement of sin, and then you would make a grain offering of thankfulness to God and showing your submission to God. And it could have been any of these situations, okay? It could have been fine flour mixed with frankincense. It could have been cakes mixed of fine flour with oil baked in an oven or in a pan or in a covered pan or a griddle so basically it could have been cooked any which way. Then you could have also taken green heads of roasted grain and mixed that with oil. And all of these were an option. And what would happen is they would take a portion of that, and that portion would be burnt on the altar. And then the remainder of that portion would go to the priests, okay? And it was eaten there in the court of the tabernacle. And so you stop and think about the priests are engaging in the ministerial work of the people of Israel, and they don't have time to do anything else. So, not only is this a way to honor God, but it's also functional, right? They're doing all the work. It's like when you have people come and help you move, it's customary to buy pizza, right? It's the same idea. And so they're doing the work, right? And so a part of this is that they get to eat some of the sacrifice. And it's no less, it's not, nobody's, well, I won't say that nobody, okay? So it wasn't that nobody maybe got upset, but it was just part of it, right? And so you give your sacrifice knowing that most of it is going to go to feed the priests. And so we see that God gets a portion of it, the priest gets the remainder, and then the person who offers it gets none of it. Several interesting things here I feel to note in chapter 2. It's not just any kind of flour, all right? It's fine flour. And if you do much baking, you know that there is a difference, right, in kind of coarse flour and fine flour. And so this is, generally speaking, with just about anything, the more refinement that it goes through, the more expensive it is, right? You go back and you go to the gas pump and you know, go 87 octane and then that's the cheapest, and then you go on up from there. Well, those are more refinement processes, and that's why they're more expensive. And people like to make money. Greg?
Now the refinement, this would be a whole grain, but it would be ground smaller.
Correct.
So he's still telling us we should eat whole grain.
No.
Not today's
No.
bleached, over-processed type of flour. Then the green, when it says green heads of grain.
Be fresh baked.
Yes, that particular kind of grain, is that because of the time of the year it is and they don't have any other grain than the green grain, or is that just unroasted grain?
Well, so let's talk about that. Let's go through those. So first off, you know, you can put as much work into something as you want to put into something, right? There's good enough, and then there's really good, right? You know, there's getting something most of the way there, and that'll pass, and then there's getting something to the best possible quality, right? So you go through the process of grinding barley or grinding wheat, because we tend to think about it as wheat. And yes, they had wheat, but they also had other things, barley and others that might be grain is the idea, right? There's lots of different kinds of grains. And so by it being fine flour, it means that they have gone through the refinement process and they have spent considerable amount of time preparing this flour in order to be ready, right? It's just like if you do actual baking, then you probably have a sifter, right? Because when you do actual baking, you sift the flour. Doesn't matter if it comes from the store labeled fine flour, you're going to get there a sifter and sift through the flour, right? It's what you do. And so the fine flour is just that. It is the highest quality flour that they had available. Now, as we keep going, though, all right, we see every one of the cakes is made with fine flour, right? But then we get down a little bit further, right? And we see some reference to a grain offering of the first fruits to the Lord, right? I'm in chapter 2, verse 14, all right? So the first fruits, right, is that which is harvested first. Right? So at that time, when the harvest was, the first fruits are the first fruits. It's whatever comes out at the beginning, right? So when you go to kill an animal, and they use that term firstborn is what they use, but the idea is the same. I have to double check. I think the terminology might even be the same. But the idea is the first. So when you first get the wheat or the grain, and you want to offer that to God, because right, think back to Cain and Abel, right? They both went to God to worship, and they made offerings, right? And so, but not everybody's offering that day was accepted by God, was it? Right? Because rather than offer the first fruit, we find out that he kind of hedged a little bit. So, yeah, it would have been the time of year, Greg, when the harvest is happening. And we see specifically in verse 14, it says crushed new grain, right? So it's telling us that it is around that harvest time. And specifically, we see that if you're offering the first fruits of the Lord, you shall offer for the grain offering of your first fruit fresh ears roasted with fire, crushed new grain. You shall put oil on it and lay frankincense on it. It is a grain offering. And I really want to try this because it sounds pretty good. So I don't know, I don't know if you've ever taken like, pumpkin seeds or something like that, and you put them in the oven and roast them in the oven, and just, they are good, But like, that's the idea here, right? Is that you're taking the head of the grain and that you're roasting it, and then you're pouring oil on it and seasoning, and, that's what you've made there. It sounds pretty good to me. So we have all of these different scenarios, and grain is going to be one of the lowest common denominators. Everybody's going to get their hands on grain, right? As we go along in the Mosaic Law and in the Torah and study, right, we know that even the poorest people among them would have access to grain, right? Because when they went to harvest their fields, they left the corners of the fields unharvested for sojourners and the poor, right? So that they could go and get gleanings from the fields. So this was going to be something everybody could do. Nobody would have had an excuse not to be able to do this. Now, this is a period of nomadic life for the Israelites, so they would have, at this point, probably been buying a lot of their grain, because they're not necessarily staying a long time anywhere. But as they go through the generations, and remember, these are meant to be statutes through the generations, everybody is going to be able to offer a grain offering. Other thoughts on this?
Compare this to our offerings.
Okay.
We whip out a checkbook, that's a lot of effort. Rip it out, throw it in the box. What type of, compared to them, there's a lot of effort going into that offering to God for their sins or for just thanksgiving. And so it sounds like we need to evaluate our giving to God. Our giving to God is just not thrown, in a church treasury box.
Mm-hmm.
It should be more than that. And I don't know how much effort we put into devoting to God or giving to God in other ways.
Tommy, you're going to get me in trouble.
Why? I jumped way ahead?
No, you just got on one of my soapboxes.
Oh.
You're right, because you're 100% right. And so, we see within, obviously there are provisions of if you didn't make it, that's okay. You can go buy it if you got the money to. But by and large, they're a nomadic agrarian society. They're doing this stuff themselves, right? And, it's interesting because this offering is not a sin offering, right? This is an offering of thanksgiving, of submission to God. And so to Tommy's point then, what does it look like for us today to give an offering of submission and thanksgiving to God, right? And, it's an interesting one, right? Because the majority of that offering didn't actually go to God, did it? It went to the priest who did the work of God, right? And so, sometimes we run into people, Tommy, who are the opposite of that, and they say, well, I don't want to give money to the church. It's just going to go, to somebody I don't know, or to patch up a roof, or that preacher who's long-winded, or whatever people say, right? But the reality is that we do need, financial contributions, right? We talked yesterday in our committee meeting about some of the various mission works that we're looking forward to engaging with, that we'll be hopefully talking about soon, to support, evangelism in the church overseas. We also, talked about bringing in and doing things here locally and the evangelism work that we can do here locally in Portage County. And the reality is that takes money. But the problem we run into, and I think this is what Tommy is getting at, is when we mistake money for time or money for other things, right? And so it is easy just to write a check. But when we show our thankfulness to God, there needs to be more to it, right? And I always go back to the marital relationship. And, All right, I'm gonna tell this one on myself. Know that I'm not bragging, okay? Maybe a little bit. So, Facebook is a horribly wonderful thing. Some days it's good, some days it's bad. Some picture popped up on my feed the other day of Sarah and I 14 years ago when we were younger. Because I know some people were still very young. But 14 years ago, right before we got married, and it was a good picture. Sometimes you just, you go, that's a good picture of us, we look cute, okay. And so I shared this picture, and all I said was, hey, here's a picture I found from us 14 years ago. We had different hairstyles back then. I had hair, so did she. But in 14 years, one thing that hasn't changed is that we still have a lot of fun doing stuff and going on adventures and things like that. That's all I said. Everyone else interpreted it as, oh, Matt must be celebrating his anniversary. That would be the only reason he would talk publicly and positively about his wife. And that is what people genuinely thought. And so, so I'm going through and I'm looking, and then I'm just reading all of these people thinking it's our anniversary. And I had to go back and said, nope, not our anniversary. Just wanted to say something nice about my wife. Our anniversary is next month, and yes, I know it this far in advance, And my point is that if you only tell your spouse how much you appreciate them and how much you love them and care for them on their birthday and anniversary, it might be a sign that you need to look at your marriage because there may be some things you need to work on in your relationship, right? And so similarly, if you think that giving them something is the only way to show your appreciation, well, I'll just buy, in my opinion, I'll just buy her earrings or whatever, a necklace or whatever. There's more to a relationship than that. And so when we talk about our sacrifice and our giving to God, if we're just giving a check, that says something about our relationship, right? Good relationships take investment. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's a friendship, a work relationship, a marriage, a relationship with God, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes communication, it takes knowledge. And if you just write a check, you're missing those other factors. And so I think Tommy's hit the nail on the head with that. I told you, Tommy, give me on my soapbox. Greg?
What hit me about this was all of what they had to do for the sin sacrifice. Mm-hmm. Now with Jesus coming by and being that ultimate sacrifice, all of the things that the Jewish nation, those Israelites, had relieved from having to do anymore because Jesus the Messiah came and fulfilled it, okay? It took away so much of the burden of physicality of following law. You think that they would have been happy, and well, I know there were several thousand on the day of Pentecost they were unhappy what they had done, but they were happy to become part of the church and to become a Christian. But it's a wonder more Jews at that time did it.
That's a good point. But sometimes we are guilty of comfort. We don't want change. And when you have learned something your whole life, that this is the way it is, and you are indoctrinated in it, and somebody comes in and says something different and says, no, you had it wrong your whole life, then it's a big change. There's a book, and I don't expect anybody to read it, so just preface that. It's called The Shoemaker and the Tea Party. It's a very fascinating read in American history. It's about the American Revolutionary era, and it's called The Shoemaker and the Tea Party. And it's the chronicle of a guy who is a shoemaker. He's a cobbler, and it is his kind of point of view recount of his life before the Revolution, during the Revolution, and then after the Revolution. And so before the Revolution, he is just this cobbler under British rule, you know, and then the Revolution happens and he goes and he serves in the army, he serves in the Continental Army. And then afterwards, of course, we win. Hope you knew that. If it's a spoiler, I'm sorry. And then afterwards, though, there's this moment where he's walking down the street and there is someone coming the other way and they look at each other and they have this interaction. And what we find out is that prior to the war, this guy was a member of the landed gentry. He was a man with title. And after the war, he's just a man. And so, and he talks a little bit about that he's able to look at him as an equal now. Whereas before, he would have had to be subservient to him, right? And so for the shoemaker, that's a pretty good deal. But for the guy who really had to change, the guy who was a lord, he, you know, his world was turned upside down. So, you know, I think that's part of it. I think part of it is, you know, some of them, you know, refuse to believe. Some of them, if they didn't see the miracles firsthand, maybe they questioned it. There's a lot of things we just don't know. But I'll say something else about relationships. Relationships can change over time. And sometimes the things that you could do in a relationship, you know, maybe you used to love hiking or something like that. You know, that was how you bonded. You know, well, a little bit of arthritis and a knee replacement later, maybe you ain't so hot to go out hiking anymore, you know? But it doesn't lessen the relationship because of the foundation you built when you were young. And I think there's a Randy Travis song, I think, from many, many years ago, where he talks about, you know,